right, hey everybody, Charlie Hogwood with Survival Dispatch here with another of our series in Lessons Learned. Today we're going to touch on hurricanes because we are in hurricane season at the moment, and this is not your normal, pick up some canned food and some potato chips and a bottle of water and you're all set. That's not what we're doing. Everybody already knows we're beyond that at this point. So these are lessons that I've learned after 30 years of living in South Florida, dealing with emergency management, dealing with my time in the military, responding to a number of large hurricanes, include all the way back to Hurricane Andrew. And I've seen you could call it anarchy, you could call it collapse. Of course, it's pretty similar to what's going on today in major cities. But there's a lot that happens in disasters that people don't think about. And if you're especially new to the area and you've never experienced the full force of a hurricane and don't know what to expect, these are some of the tips and tricks and lessons learned that I've picked up over these many years in dealing with these storms. And some of them are hard learned, some of them are common sense we don't think about, but let's dig into them and get familiar with what's going on with a hurricane. Hurricane season is going to run from June 1st to November 30th. They predicted that this year was supposed to be a very busy year. We've had a dust cloud off of the Sahara Desert that's kind of dampened down the Atlantic, but now that's lifted and now storms are starting to pop back up again. So the most active period of hurricane season tends to be later season. It might be August through October where you'll see the biggest storms. That's when the ocean is the hottest, when the Gulf of Mexico, the waters are the warmest, and that warm water is what feeds the hurricane, which is essentially a jet engine. The way a hurricane works is that heat comes off the water, it comes up and it starts to vortex, and the Coriolis effect is going to give you that rotation as it comes across the water and somewhere maybe hits land. Now, where it lands, nobody knows. It's that game of roulette. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But the good news about hurricanes is they are considered noticed events. So there's two kinds of event, and you may have heard me talk about this in the past. In emergency management, you have no notice event. So like an earthquake might be no notice, a wildfire might be no notice. Something that happened and all of a sudden is a no notice event. Hurricanes sometimes will give us weeks of notice. And the ones that are out there off in the Atlantic, if they're moving to the higher latitudes, are less of a threat to the mainland US because of the way as the earth spins, and then you get that rotation of storm and winds, prevailing winds going off to the east. But when you see a hurricane or a tropical wave, a depression, a tropical storm that rides really low in the Caribbean as it moves into the Gulf, that's the one that's going to come in and it's going to come up. They're always going to turn north, but where does it start that turn? If it starts to turn early enough, it'll miss the mainland US. If it comes in flat and comes down low, it will go right across Florida, it'll come up into the Gulf. And a bit of trivia, the most common place to get struck by a hurricane in the United States is actually the northwest coast of Florida. So the panhandle area of Florida gets a lot of hurricane activity. Things get into the Gulf, they get into the even warmer water of the Gulf, and as they start to make that turn to the north and they get caught up in the prevailing winds, they get dragged up onto the west coast, into the Gulf and into northwest Florida in the panhandle area. So that's not to say that North and South Carolina are not going to get hit. They've had many hard strikes, and so has South Florida. You don't see too many hurricanes strike North Florida on the East Coast. So that's an interesting tidbit. Around where Cape Canaveral is, they don't get much hurricane strike. Luckily, because they've got all that stuff there that they don't want beat up. So some storms are going to give you that notice in some of weeks, and some are going to give you just hours of notice. Hurricane Andrew in 1992 popped up right off the coast, right off the Bahamas, and it was a small storm in geographic and physical size, but when it hit land, it packed a heck of a punch. So don't discount the smaller size storms, and they can show up in just hours. One day it was there, not there, next day it was there, next day it was on the coast and caught a lot of people unaware. So every storm it's different. Every storm, so smaller storms can actually be more damaging than some of the physically larger storms. So you'll see the satellite imagery where you got this storm that's the entire size of the Gulf of Mexico. That's a big storm. Does that mean that it's going to have a big punch across all of the coastline? Not necessarily. It just depends. You might get a big storm, but it may not have the organization, the firm eye wall, and the punch to get that eye into the coast and really do some devastation. It just depends. Every storm is going to have a different characteristic. 2004, we had Hurricane Francis came through. It was a 48-hour rain event. It had a lot of wind, but it was a rain event. Just a couple of short weeks later, we had Hurricane Jean come through, landed within 1 mile of where Francis made landfall, and it was a smaller storm moving a lot faster to a lot more wind damage. So you can't look at just and say, okay, these two storms are completely different in that this is going to be more destructive than the other. You've got to look at the forward speed and everything else that goes along with that. So some areas who take a direct hit might not feel the full brunt of the storm if they missed the rain bands. Hurricane Wilma in 2005 hit down in Broward County in South Florida, and it was very devastating to the western part of Broward County, but some of the other areas, even more coastal, didn't feel the strength of that storm because the rain bands are where the energy is being dropped down and dissipated onto the surface, onto the land surface. So the people that went through Hurricane Wilma that really got hammered said, this was terrible, I'm never doing that again. But people just a couple of miles away said, well, that storm wasn't that bad. Next time I'm not going to prepare for it. And now you start to see how that complacency in preparedness kind of bakes itself into future storms. So you can't discount it just because you were lucky enough to not get into the rain bands. That's where you're going to have a problem. All evacuation decisions are going to be made by a human. That's part of the problem. They have a lot of input. They have a lot of consultants. They have a lot of software. They have the HAZUS software. They have all of the imagery that comes in, and they say, okay, here's the forward motion, here's the trending through NOAA, this is where it's going to go, and then it makes a sudden turn. Now, forecasting in the last couple of years has really increased the forecast accuracy by about 50%, which is amazing compared to just some years ago where, at the last minute, the storm would make a turn or would not make a turn and catch a lot of people by surprise. That doesn't mean that just because we can, that's like risk homeostasis. We talk about that in survival. Just because you've got great brakes on your car these days compared to an old car doesn't mean you wait longer to step on the brake. You're still going to have the accident if you do that. So don't allow that risk homeostasis to creep in and delay your preparedness. Do everything ahead of time. That's what we're all about here. That's why we are here. So when a human makes the call to evacuate, they have a lot of things that they've got to think about. And you can't just tell everybody, say, okay, well, it's coming here, evacuate. Because that dumps everybody onto the evacuation routes, and that's what causes that congestion and those problems. And like in Katrina, when all of the different phases of the evacuation got thrown out of whack because people weren't making the right decisions, you dumped people in front of the others that needed to get evacuated first, and they all got backed up, and you had people that were trapped on I-10 during the worst part of Hurricane Katrina, and there were some fatalities because of those decisions. So just because somebody says it's time to evacuate, we can wait. You may not want to wait. You may want to get out early, but if you get up too early, then you're part of the what they call the clearance problem or the buffer problem to get those phases evacuated. So be ready to go at all times. Pay a lot of attention. Get out sooner than later so you're not caught in that problem. Know your flood zones and know your wind zones. So that's two different things that work together. The flood zone is based on the elevation of your land, and do you have waterways, canals, lakes, the ocean close to you? Is your land sitting lower than some of the other areas? So you have flood zones. So what they've done with NOAA is they've done a LiDAR scan of all of they've done most of the US, but the areas that we're worried about, the flood zones, are along the hurricane areas. And they've created flood zone maps. You can go online and you can look for a flood zone map in your area. If you live in a flood zone, you want to get some flood insurance. It's not very expensive and it will pay off in spades if you have a claim. And if you don't have that flood insurance, you could be out completely for insurance. So learn where your flood zones are, learn where your storm surge areas are. If you're anywhere near the coast and it's a lower lying coast, that storm surge could come in like it did for Hurricane Katrina and overwhelm everything. On Florida, when the storm surge comes in, it's not just the beach area that could be a problem. It's also those mangrove areas. It's also those canals. A lot of canals will back the water up onto the land and they'll spill out into communities around them. So it's not just the ocean. Water doesn't compress. If you stop the flow of water, it backs up somewhere else and it's going to start to break levees and it's going to start getting into some of those areas. And if you've ever flown over the state of Florida in an aircraft and look down, it's amazing how much water you see. There's pockmarks of water over the entire landscape. So we're just barely above sea level. So that's something that you want to think about. So the wind zone of your home, you can go on to the internet and you can look up what is my wind zone and you can find out, am I in the 150 mile an hour wind zone? So somewhere around West Palm Beach might be the 150 mile an hour wind zone, but you get into Orlando, now you might be 120 mile an hour wind zone or less. You're like, well, is it that much of a difference? Well, it can be. Absolutely, it can be. Because by the time a storm comes on shore, it's going to start to lose some of that energy as it loses that the energy coming off the hot water of the ocean or the Gulf. So knowing your wind zone makes a big difference on how you prepare and when you would want to evacuate. If you live somewhere that has bridges, and you have to plan on evacuation, you've got to pay a lot of attention to where that is. At some point, they will lock drawbridges down and not let you cross, or they'll lift them up and not let you cross. Depends on the type of bridge and depends on what the local authorities are going to want to do. But if that's the case and you get trapped on the wrong side of the bridge, you are going to be on your own and they will tell you that. So know where your bridges are and what they will do in case of a storm or flooding. Evacuations are going to be based on forecasts, and storms can actually explode in minutes and or change directions. So when they look at storms for forecasting, they always expect at least one level of category increased of intensity because it can change in a moment. And they might also look at the trending and say, okay, which way is this going to land? Storms will try to come towards the shore and then they'll move a little bit and they will affect surrounding counties. That affects all of that evacuation that we were talking about. So if you've got Palm Beach County trying to evacuate north and all of a sudden the storm jukes north and then comes in at Stewart, Fort Pierce, or Daytona or somewhere up there, and all that traffic's on the highway trying to go north, well, you just drove right into the storm. That happens every time. So that's something that's important to know. So if those evacuations are not phased properly, they're going to have some people trapped in the path of the storm, like we talked about with Hurricane Katrina. Evacuations now are no longer about long distance. It used to be, okay, there's a storm coming to Florida, let's go ahead and evacuate to Georgia or North Carolina. That doesn't work anymore because sometimes those storms will change in the evacuation drive time between Florida and North Carolina. Now you're stuck on the highway, and as you're going north, so's that storm, and at some point it's going to cross your path and you're going to be stuck in that. So the old way of thinking was drive hundreds of miles to get away from the storm. The newer way in recent years of evacuation thinking is only tens of miles. You don't have to go that far to get away from a hurricane, but you want to have an evacuation plan that takes you in different directions. Have an evacuation plan that takes you north and have an alternate plan that might take you south. That way, if the storm is trending in one way or the other, you already have a plan to go the other way. That will help you. So tens of miles, not hundreds of miles. Storm surge and flooding are what kill more people and damage more property than the wind itself. It always happens that way. Flooding is the #1 major costliest disaster for property and human lives in the United States every year. You can't fight water. That stuff is just, it's heavy, it's fast, it just does not move for you. It goes where it wants to go. If you're familiar with some of the hurricanes, I think it was Hurricane Matthew that went into the Carolinas here just a couple of seasons ago. People were caught out in some of those big marshy areas, and as all the water was draining off the country, moving through those lowlands to get to the ocean like it normally does, and all that water was coming on shore, it flooded all those roads and washed them out. So you don't want to be moving in that kind of water. So pay attention to that and don't get stuck in it. The northeast quadrant of the storm is always going to be the most intense. That is because of the forward motion of a storm and because of the way that as the storm is moving forward and the Coriolis effect has the rotation going, as it moves forward and that rotation is moving forward, that's going to be the more dangerous part of the storm. That's not to say that any of the other downside quadrants are going to be less. It means that if that storm is coming in below you, then you're going to get a more intense ride than as if it were coming in above you. So that's something to think about. As the storm passes you, a lot of times the wind will change direction. So some people incorrectly prepare their homes and say, I'm facing the ocean. I'm only going to prepare the front of the house. I'm going to just hide everything else in the back of the house. Okay, that's fine. But depending on where that storm comes, as it goes past you or as it moves up the coast, the wind that's hitting the front of the house is now going all the way around that terrain and coming back up and hitting you on the back of the house. I've actually seen a dump truck semi-trailer, triaxle dump trailer, blow over that was parked in a neighborhood, and then the storm passed and it lifted it all the way back up and blew it over the other way. That takes a lot of energy to lift those kind of things and flip them back and forth like that. We're talking about a full-on 53-foot triaxle dump trailer that was parked without the semi on it. That's a lot of energy to flop back and forth. So that's something that you want to think about as you prepare your home. So that's not just the trees on one side of your house, that's the trees that are hanging over you on all sides of the house. All loose items can become and will become projectiles. Lawn furniture, decks, gazebos, pergolas, trampolines, all that stuff out there that is not properly secured can lift up and blow across the terrain. It might be your stuff hitting your house, it might be somebody else's stuff hitting your house. But either way, you've got to prepare for that. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, tape on windows is a bad idea. It doesn't work. All it does is make things worse. If you don't have shutters on the house that can stand an impact and you put tape on the windows like you see on TV or in the old days, if something hits that, the tape holds the glass together in large shards, and those large shards are going to come flying through your living room. So if you don't have any shutters, don't put anything as far as tape on those windows because it's just going to make things worse, more dangerous for you. Slow storms dump a lot more water than fast storms. So a lot of people don't think about that. So if a storm comes through, we talked about in 2004 with Hurricane Francis came through, it was a 48-hour rain event that just dumped a deluge of water. It just sat on us for 2 days, just raining and flooding everything. Then a couple weeks later, Hurricane Jean came through at a fast speed, blew through, hardly had any rain it seemed like, and then we had nice cold weather afterward because it drew in the fall air. So when we're out picking up the mess after that storm, at least we weren't sweating. So that's the upside. So the slower a storm is moving with its forward motion, the more rain you are likely to get. So that's why they've changed the ratings a little bit to add an ERM, which is an enhanced rain matrix. It talks about the slower storms dumping more water. How is that going to affect the canals, retention areas, and ponds in your area? So saturated soil, here's something that a lot of people don't think about. Saturated soil can cause trees to fall for weeks after the storm has passed. A lot of these heavy rain events will sit on the ground. The ground can no longer percolate to get that water down in. The more developed areas that have a lot of roads and driveways and rooftops, and every square inch of land is covered with some form of hardscape, hard surface, concrete or pavement, or home, that water now has less places to get into the aquifer, so that water sits everywhere. And as it sits there, the trees and the sand in those soils start to loosen that cohesiveness. And soil is already a non-cohesive type of material. It's not like clay. You get up into Georgia, somewhere you get more clay. Down in Florida or along the beach areas, you're going to get a lot more sand. Sand drains quickly, but it doesn't hold things together very well. And as that water sits around those roots of those trees and the leaves are blowing off of them and they've already been shook up and they've already been stressed, those trees can start to break loose and they can fall on a home. Just this weekend, there was a tree that fell on a garage of a child's birthday party, and 19 people went to a hospital. We didn't even have a hurricane, but the soils allowed that tree to break loose and fall down on that house. So that's something you got to think about. Just because you say, wow, great, I made it through that storm, you've got to go outside and you got to start looking at those trees. Are they leaning? Is the ground soft? Do we need to start thinking about preemptively pruning or trimming those trees or cutting them down? That's an important thing to keep in mind. Wind damaged trees can also become a fire hazard in the future. As those trees, Hurricane Andrew did some serious tree damage in South Florida. I could see remnants of vegetation damage for 10 years after that storm. There was just large lots of tree stands that were broke off halfway up. All that brush sits down on the ground now, dries out in the sun, and now it becomes a fire hazard for the summer. So once you start getting that tree damage, you got to start getting out there now and picking that stuff up and start thinking about getting those trees removed, or you could face a big problem as the weather gets hotter. 72-hour kits are old news. We don't even do 72-hour kits anymore when it comes to natural disaster. We have seen in recent years that 72 hours is not enough time to get things back on track. Now, the recommendation for having your survival supplies for the home go from 1 to 2 weeks, depending on where you live, because of there's that many people now that have moved into disaster zones and coastal areas that you just can't get enough help into them. So be prepared to be off grid for 1 to 2 whole weeks after a storm. Candles, it's a pet peeve of mine. My daughter is, she loves her, nice Yankee candle, but candles are a very common cause of house fires in normal times, but after hurricanes, that's enhanced. Candles, you've got people running around, it's dark, they tip over, you catch a curtain on fire, and old houses, you might have had minutes to get out of. New houses, they're gonna come down with all that smoke in 90 seconds. It's incredible how fast houses burn these days because of all the vinyls and the plastics and the things that are built into these new homes. Look up the Close Before You Doze videos online. I've talked about those before. I'm going to do a how to prepare your house for house fires video in the future here, and we'll talk about some of that, but look up how fast a new house burns compared to an old house, and you'll be amazed. So I don't recommend candles as part of your survival kit at all. I recommend LED lights. You can get them real cheap these days. They'll run for a lot more hours and give you plenty of light, and you can get a pack of 4 lanterns now for $20. So it's definitely worth it to go that route as opposed to candles. I also learned a lesson years ago about staging the supplies. So what does that mean? So all of the things that we would need for a hurricane, if we know that we're going to be off grid from a hurricane, we've stayed home, we're going to wait it out and do it the hard way. Don't just say, well, I've got stuff in my bedroom, I got stuff in the garage, I got stuff, in my car, it's everywhere. Take all of your hurricane supplies and stage them in one area. It might be the dining room or somewhere that's close to the garage door or the front door, so that if you do have to evacuate at some point after the storm, you have it all there ready to go. You're not now trying to walk through the house that's leaking with water or flooding, trying to say, where did I put this? Where did I put that? Stage everything in nice big totes, label the totes, and then keep it all organized. And if you take something out, put it back or keep it in that area so that you'll have it. And again, that is going to be a big help. It also helps you to monitor your consumption of your hurricane food. You don't want to be 2 hours into the hurricane and you've already eaten all your Pop-Tarts for the next 2 weeks, whatever that is. Because when people are doing nothing, they're sitting around, they are snacking, and you will blow through your food very quickly. So that'll help you monitor that situation as well. Also, if you've got pets, put your pet carriers, get a pet carrier for your pet, place that with your stage supplies. Get your vet records for the animals. Make sure they got their shots. Make sure they got their rabies tag. Make sure you've got the leash for your pets, all of your pets, even the cats. Figure out how to contain them. And then have all of that in one spot. So you're not looking, where's the dog leash? Where's the cat carrier? Where are these things? Have them all together and ready to go, to include their portable bowls, pre-mixed like a bag of food somewhere in a container, so that you can evacuate if you needed to. At least during the worst part of the storm, Put them in their carriers where you can watch them. So if somebody opens the door, your pet doesn't run out and run off into the wind somewhere, to maybe never be found. You've got to pay attention to them because they will panic and they will be out of there. So that's important. Think of your pets as if you would your children. Some people will think of them as more than their children. Do what you got to do. Identify shelters in your area that will accept pets, even if you don't intend to go to a shelter if you have a pet. Even if you don't have a pet, it's wise to have a printout of where all the shelters are in your area. We can all say we're tough and we can all say, well, I'm going to wait it out and I'm going to be good to go. But as soon as the tree falls in your house or the water starts rising, you might have to reevaluate that decision. And that's one of the hardest questions in preparedness. When do I leave? And if your place becomes untenable, if you're not going to be able to stay there, sleep there, and be safe there, then you got to have somewhere to go. If you don't know where to go and the internet is down, that's not the time to try to find a shelter. So know where they are. Take a drive out there and say, aha, this is the middle school. That's where my shelter is going to be. And now I know if I have to leave, that's where it is. I don't plan on needing it, but I should know. And if I'm going to take pets, I have to know where a shelter will accept those. We just had a big storm up in North Georgia, and it had tornadoes, and we had a lot of people come to the shelters, and the only shelter that was open would not accept pets. We had 15 people sleeping out in the parking lot in their cars with their pets while the tornadoes were coming through. That's not a great situation, so you've got to think about how you're going to react to that. Identify and prepare your home safe room. This is a big deal. If your home safe room is a big closet or under the stairs or wherever it is in the house, take the stuff out of there that's going to be in your way if you all have to bail in there and put something over your heads. That's important. You don't want to say, yep, that's the closet we're going to be in, and you open up the door and all of your summer gear falls out on your hallway there. That's going to be a problem. So identify the place that you're going to go. Make sure it is prepared with all the things that you would need to be in there in case the roof starts blowing off of your house. Is that safe room at risk of a tree falling on it? So your roof might blow off and you might be okay in your safe room, but is there a 200-year oak tree that has the reach to land on that part of the house, or one of the large branches come off that tree and land on the house? Something you've got to think about and take into your planning. Make the safe room or identify another room in the home that'll be your sleeping, resting, cooling room. So a lot of people will get a generator and say, okay, I'm going to run my air conditioner, I'm all good. Your portable generator is not going to run your home air. But what I do recommend is if you have a room identified that everybody can sleep in and camp out style, a couple of air mattresses, some blankets on the floor, all the pillows are already in there, you can put a window shaker air conditioner. Buy one at the store, put it in the garage, just leave it there. Don't mess with it until the storm comes. Pull that thing out of the box, put it in the window after the storm goes by, and keep that room as a cooling room because there's going to be some hot days ahead after the storm. And the window shaker air conditioner can be run in the evening with a decent sized generator. So we're going to do a whole separate video on generators and on the strategy for that coming up. So hang in there for that and we'll talk about it some more. Look at your home insurance policy. Has that been updated? Have you done a hurricane mitigation inspection? That will also give you a home insurance discount. So they go in and it's a multi-point plan. Somebody will do the inspection. They'll make sure if you have a gable roof that those gables are reinforced. They'll look at the tabs that are holding your roof down. There's a lot of things they look at. And once they have that form filled out, you send that to your insurance company, they'll give you a discount. That's very helpful. So make sure your house is ready for all those things. I would recommend collecting some extra building supplies and some tarps. Just put those away. So get some extra screws, get some nails, get some tarps, good heavy duty tarps. I believe we've got some tarps that we've put into the Survival Dispatch Amazon store that will help with that kind of thing. The cheap blue tarps will get you by for a little bit and then they will rot and wear out. So you're going to be buying more and more tarps, so you might as well buy a decent one and have it last, the roofing quality tarps. The idea is you might want to have some extra 2x4s, maybe some extra plywood if you have the space to put those things. That will help you fix and patch any holes, broken windows, or if you have to leave, you can secure your home in that case. I'd also recommend getting a couple of cans of spray paint, depending on the color of your house. If you have a lighter color house, then get some black spray paint. If you have a darker color house, maybe get some fluorescent orange spray paint or some white spray paint and have a can of that. The reason for that is after a storm blows through, a lot of house numbers are gone, mailboxes are gone, street signs are gone. And what you do is you go out right on the side of your house and you'll say, put your address on the house, and you can put the name of your insurance company on the house. You can put a contact phone number on the house if somebody needs to reach you while you're away. There's some things that you can do to mark your home. It's going to have to be repaired anyway, so you can paint right on the plywood or right on the side of the house. That's a pretty common thing to see from experienced people. Update your medical kit. Make sure that anything you have in your first aid kit is up to date and ready to go. Think about the injuries that might happen after a disaster. A lot of injuries happen after the storm. Chainsaw injuries, really nasty trauma injuries. People are tired, they're hot, they're grumpy, they're hungry, they're thirsty, and now they're wielding a chainsaw that they're not used to doing, and that thing comes off and then they drop it right on a leg and you're gonna have a major injury. Tourniquets, hemostatic powders, different trauma bandages, hydration tablets, drip drop, any of those kind of things are all gonna help you to get through in the difficulty post-storm. Get a 5 or a 10 pound ABC rated fire extinguisher, at least one. I would recommend a couple of them because sometimes during hurricanes, gas lines get broken, propane tanks roll around, gas is everywhere, candles start the house on fire. Having a fire extinguisher will go a long way. A 10 pound fire extinguisher will put out a lot of house fires, more than you might think. The little aerosol can fire extinguishers are next to useless. Get a decent real size fire extinguisher, and that'll go a long way to keeping your family safe. Also, I'd recommend getting a box of heavy drum liner trash bags. You'll see those in the Home Depots or Lowe's or one of the big stores. It comes in a big box and it'll be 55-gallon drum liners. They're heavy duty for like leaves and yard debris. Take those around, and if the storm is coming at your house and you're worried about water coming in, open up those big trash bags and put them over your computers, put them over your file cabinets, put them over anything that you don't want rain dropping down out of the roof to drip on, and that will help you. Put clothes and stuff in those bags, tie them off, stack them up, get them off the floor, in case of flooding. Those bags will go a long way, and they'll also be good after the storm passes, that you can pick all that stuff up in your yard and start collecting it and get it out to the street. I also recommend take a video of all of your home valuables. We should all have that anyway. We want video and we want photographs. Take your cell phone, take your digital camera, go and just walk through your house and just take a picture of everything in there. And if you get to stereo equipment or computers and stuff like that, flip those things over and look at the serial numbers, look at the model numbers, and just snap pictures of all that. All your guns, write down all your serial numbers, all of your expensive items, write down serial numbers. Keep all that stuff written down in your family contingency binder that we always talk about, and then take all those videos, upload them to the cloud, upload them to Google Drive or Dropbox or wherever you want to put them. Get them on a flash drive, because if something happens and you need to make a claim, you can now say, these are all the things I had. Make sure that the date is turned on your video, on your camera. It says this is the date and the time I took that video, because they'll know that that is current of your home, and they'll be able to say, well, okay, you're right, you did have that nice home entertainment system, we're going to get that into insurance. So upload those videos to the cloud so you'll have them in case you have to evacuate and not come back to your house. You'll be able to download them and show them to your insurance adjuster later on. Upload and back up all of your computers also. You can set your computers up to automatically back up to Google Drive, and you can set up the folders in Google Drive, and you can say, this is my Mac computer, this is my Windows computer, and then you can go in there and you can see everything on each of those machines, even if these machines are lost or damaged. So that saves all of your data. There's a number of different ways to do that. Make that family contingency binder of all of your hard to replace documents. Passports, photos of all your credit cards, all of your accounts, your insurances, car insurance, home insurance, medical insurance. Have all of those documents in a binder, and you can go online and you can get they're like the diplomatic bags. They're water resistant, waterproof bags that you can put a binder in. You can get them for as low as $19. Put all your documents in that thing. It's now waterproof, and if you're dragging your stuff through the water, you've got all of your documentation. That's really hard to replace, and you don't have to deal with that later on. Make a digital version of everything. Put it on a nice durable flash drive. You can also encrypt those flash drives if you don't want people to have access to them. So that's a great idea as well. Storm is coming. Lay out all of your clothing and all of your essential equipment. before the storm in case you have to change or get into or get out of bed, including your identification. In the military, we always had a go outfit. You know, it's all draped across the chair. You got your boots, you got your pants, you got your jacket, you got your belt, you got all of your pocket clutter all right there. Jump into it and you can go. Last thing you want to do is be evacuating your home in your bathrobe en naturel. Nobody in my neighborhood wants to see that. So there's that. Do that for everybody in the family too, to include the kids. Where are their shoes and where are all the things that they're going to need in case something happens at the home. I also have recommended, you'll hear mayors of different cities say, okay, we've warned you many times to evacuate. If you're not going to evacuate, use a black Sharpie and write your name and social security number or phone number on your arm, so when we pull your body out of the water, we know who to call. It's very morbid, but a Sharpie can come a long way. If you get into a floodwater situation and you're trying to get family across floodwaters and you're on your own, that is a way to identify them in case they get washed downstream. It's a terrible situation, but it has happened, and we want to know as soon as possible who those people are. So that's just another morbid tip. I would also recommend preparing a lost child packet for every member of the family, not just the kids. And the reason for that is if you do get separated for some reason in a shelter during an evacuation, or you stayed home and you got the grandparents wouldn't leave their house, have a lost child ID kit for both of the grandparents and your dogs and everything else. It's all in a little packet, and you can say, these people are missing. You can hand these to the authorities, and they can have all of the important information on those individuals. Some of them even allow you to put DNA with some hair on there or something like that in a little pouch. These are all ways to get your family back together again or identify family members. So morbid as it may be, we're planning for all levels of contingency in this. Don't go out into the storm just to see the eye of the storm. I've seen the eye of the storm. It is an amazing event. You're getting hammered by winds. It feels like it's going to blow the house away. All of a sudden, within 30 seconds, it all stops. And you can step outside and look up and see clouds, crispy white clouds in the sky. And then just moments later, the wind goes the other direction, and it's that whole thing starts all over again. It's very surreal. But don't go out in it, because that eye is going to pass very quickly and you're going to get caught in it and something's going to come flying at you and hit you. Do not tour the neighborhood after the storm, because power lines are going to be hanging down, wires are going to be in puddles, they're live, and a lot of injuries happen that way. Stay hydrated. Hydration is critical. You don't think about drinking water in these kind of events. You're amped up and you forget all about it sometimes. Use safety with chainsaws and heavy things. So just because the storm has gone through, this is not a time to just do away with all of our safety considerations. You need to be more safe in that situation, because help is not coming as quickly as it normally would. You're on your own for a little while. Don't walk in standing water. A lot of people talk about there's the electrocution hazard. There's also drain fields and septic systems and gas tanks from stores and runoff from the highway and hazmat and stuff floating in that water. Don't go in that water. It looks like it might be fun to play in. It's not. It can be very dangerous for you and your children. Mosquitoes will be back in force, especially a few days after the rains. All that rain comes through, the mosquitoes are going to be gone for the first day or so, and then they are going to come back in the next weeks like crazy. And some areas will fly aircraft over, dropping the chemicals into the air to try to bring those down. You don't want to be outside getting caught in those sprayers from those planes. Make a strip map of your home. I'm going to do a video on the sketched strip map here shortly, so you'll see that coming up, and we'll explain all that, because you might not recognize your own neighborhood after a major storm. So that's going to be important to know how to navigate your neighborhood. Update your commo plan and alert your out-of-area contact if a storm is headed your way. If you know that a storm is coming anywhere near your vicinity and you're going to be affected in any way, you call your out-of-area contact and say, okay, here's what we expect to happen. If anybody calls looking for me, this is what our plan is. And then now Aunt Sally, the out-of-area contact, can now act as your relay for everybody else. And you need to let anybody else who's looking for you know Aunt Sally's phone number, so that she can now transfer that information to them, so that they maybe can help you or assist in some way. But now you got to get that flow of information going. Texting will work better than voice calls in over overused phone system. So a lot of times you get, during a disaster, everybody gets on the phone at the same time, and it just sucks the bandwidth off the towers. If you text, as opposed to trying to make a voice call, you can text. That phone will keep trying to pull that tower until it can get through. It works on a smaller section of the bandwidth, and text can get shot through a lot easier than the large requirements of voice going through a tower system. So texting is always better, and your phone will keep trying to do that to send that message. I would also make a box of cables and chargers for all of your devices. So whatever devices you're using, iPads, tablets, phones, whatever it is, make a little bag or a box of all the cables that you would need to charge and operate those devices. And then get some of those little portable battery pack chargers. You can get a little 10,000 milliamp charger that will charge a phone a couple of times. They're not very expensive these days. Have a couple of those so you can charge everything back up while you're waiting on power to come back, for the grid to come back up. Buy a couple of those portable chargers and to hang on to, and identify them in the box, and keep them charged. Check on them periodically and use them so that the batteries don't get conditioned. Consider working with neighbors using walkie-talkies for information. So if you've got neighbors down your street or on your block, or people that you are friends with and you want to stay in touch with them, make sure they have a walkie-talkie. It doesn't have to be a ham radio. It can just be a bubble pack Motorola walkie-talkie from the store, and make sure they know what channel to be on. Make sure you do a radio check. And now you can have a set up check-in time if you need to stay on top of the health and safety of maybe some elderly people down the street. You can call in at whatever your check-in time is. How you guys doing? You all right over there? And they'll tell you if they're doing okay or if they're hanging on to the roof being blown away. So that's a little bit of a help to stay in touch with your neighbors. You keep in mind that your camping gear can be used in times of disaster at the home. So you don't have to go out and get anything different for a storm per se. If you've got sleeping bags and tents and cooking stoves and propane bottles and all of those lanterns and all those things, all of that stuff can be used at the house. Some of it even inside the home. So put your camping gear, your survival gear, all in that same staged area like we talked about earlier. Stay on top of personal hygiene, and now that we're dealing with COVID-19 issues, now we've got to start thinking about that social separation. What happens if somebody in your family is sick? How are you going to isolate them, quarantine them away from the house during a disaster like this? You may have to set up that warm room or hot room or whatever you're going to do to manage that situation, because the worst thing that would be happening is somebody is very sick, it happens in a hurricane, and now everybody else is sick and the hospitals are full or you can't get there. And then everybody has to evacuate to the hospital. You leave your home unsecured. I mean, there's 100 bad things that could happen. So just because a hurricane comes along, that does not preempt the pandemic that we might be going through at the time the hurricane's there. So think about how you're going to do that, and think about it ahead of time, and have the materials on hand. The germ warfare issue, which is free on insider.survivaldispatch.com right now, has a way to set up isolation rooms and what materials you would need for that. Strangely, some of that same material is what you would use to repair your home during a hurricane. So it has that dual use. So check that out. Be ready to evacuate, and I am almost done right now. Be ready to evacuate at any time, even after the storm. There can be other events that can force you out. Hazmat, flash flooding, fires, crime, structural failure. Those are just a few of the things. During one of the storms that we were managing going through South Carolina a couple seasons ago, in the middle of the storm, it had already gone by. Now we're looking at levees that were starting to fail. We're monitoring those. We're trying to get information to the residents and the emergency responders in those areas to get out of the way of those levees. A train decided to make a run down some railroad tracks that were in the water, and that water, like we talked about, made those trees unstable. Well, the water turned the railroad tracks into pudding. The train drives down there and the tracks collapsed, and now we had a train tip over, and the train was releasing hazmat material. So not a great decision on the part of the railroad, and the neighbors in those areas were like, okay, now I got to deal with a hazmat train that's spilling, and I'm dealing with floodwaters and hurricanes. So that becomes a complex technological disaster at that point. And now that changes everything. So you have to know what's the hazard mitigation for your area? What is your exposure to railways, highways, things where hazmat can pass, pipelines, fuel tanks. Any of those things, you got to start thinking about in my area. What if? Play the what if game. What if this happens? What would I do for that? Do I have the items for that? So last thing I'll leave you with is take your ID everywhere you go if you have to leave the home. The reason for that is there will be checkpoints. There will be travel restrictions. You might not be allowed back in your own neighborhood if you cannot prove that you live there, and that could be a problem, and there's a lot of fights break out because people are not allowed into neighborhoods. So make sure you always have some identification with you, and that you have a purpose for being out, or you could be sent away somewhere else. So that's all I got on hurricane lessons learned. It's a lot of lessons learned over a lot of years experience in real hurricanes. I hope some of them help you out. Check out this information and a lot more at insider.survivaldispatch.com, and check out our magazine. We have a lot of information there. We got a lot of videos on our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of audio on our podcast channel. So check us out, and until next time, this is Charlie, Survival Dispatch. I'm out.